The books that Andre mentioned are primarily haiku and tanka, which I've been writing for about 20 years, and I've recently started to write longer form poetry. So thank you, Andre, for publishing some of my first longer form efforts. Okay, so my three poems I'm going to read today are kind of connected to childhood. And the first one is called Chatty Cathy. Does anyone here, any of the women, or maybe the guys, did you have a Chatty Cathy? Yeah, they were fun. Anyway, so here's my poem, Chatty Cathy. When I was young, I never played with dolls. Now in middle age, I've suddenly inherited one, an old Chatty Cathy, though the pull string that protruded out of her back to make her talk is missing. Her once beautiful, voluminous skirt shows clear signs of water damage. Her long, gleaming hair is matted. She's still got that painted on smile, though, but it's only skin deep. I know that inside, if she had a real inside, she'd be pretty messed up, likely on a fast track to teenage delinquency. I check her arms for needle marks or self-cutting. Nothing, just a strange colored mark on her upper right thigh. Glad I never had a daughter to raise. A son was bad enough. But a girl can get into such trouble, so easily taken advantage of, then bearing the price, bearing the unwanted child, who would always only get a second-hand doll, probably a lot like this one. A child who would turn silent, with not even anyone there to pull the string, to try to find out what she really had to say. So, secondly, I grew up in the space age in the 60s there, and I watched the moon landings and stuff, and I wanted to be an astronaut, or I wanted to be a poet. So one person who did manage to become an astronaut was Svetlana Savitskaya. So this poem is about Svetlana. So Ty idi Dyavushka is its name, is the title of the poem, which in English means, you go, girl. At 16, Svetlana Savitskaya snuck out to parachute without her parents knowing. When her father found out, he, the deputy commander-in-chief of Soviet air defense, slapped her on the back and roared, you go, girl. By her 17th birthday, the soft-spoken Sveta had made 450 jumps. The next year saw record-breaking stratospheric dives as she plummeted from 14,250 meters, nearly out of this world. In certain circles, she became known as Miss Sensation. No surprise that when she graduated from high school, she enrolled in the Moscow State Aviation Institute. At 22, slim and petite, a pretty brunette with bangs, she became a certified flight instructor. She set her sights even higher to become a world-class test pilot. Her record of 2,683 kilometers per hour and a MiG-21 remains unbroken. Her star rose even higher when at 32 in a Yak 18, she won the Women's World Aerobatic Championship in Britain, modestly accepting the award in a dress she'd sewn herself. Then in 1980, she was chosen for cosmonaut training, and 4 years later blasted off from Baikonur to rendezvous with two male colleagues aboard the Soyuz space station. They greeted her with an apron and asked, "What's for dinner?" Sveta quickly established a working professional relationship, but not before accepting a bouquet of flowers grown in orbit. On her next mission 2 years later, she rolled up her sleeves, so to speak, to cut and weld metal, the first woman to walk in space. Plans for an all-woman Russian crew led by Sveta to celebrate International Women's Day kept being put off. It was finally canceled when Sveta became pregnant. She wasn't to be the first mom in space. That was an American, Anna Lee Fisher. Now in her 70s and retired, does she stare up at the heavens, think if they offered her a one-way trip to Mars, she'd take it? Well, why not? As long as they didn't hand her a broom and expect her to sweep up all that dust. And the third one is about my childhood home. I grew up in the interior of British Columbia, and I was surrounded by 5 reservations. And so I grew up with Aboriginal students who I learned nothing about at all. I've gathered since they were interior Salish, have a wonderful, magnificent culture, but at the time, it wasn't something that we understood or that was taught in schools, or it was a different world. And thank heavens, we've made some progress since then. But this is basically me trying to grapple with growing up in this tiny little resource village in the interior of British Columbia called Lillooet. And the poem is called White. The girls from the reserve were big. They were often held back a year or two at school, so they seemed like giants, tall with powerful thighs and upper arms and rapid fists. We stayed clear of them. It wasn't that we were prejudiced like our parents. If they'd have lived on our street, we'd have been friends. But they came from the reserve where none of us ever went. One day after lunch, waiting in line for the school doors to open, I noticed one of the girls from the reserve grinding something beneath her foot. Leaning closer, I saw it was a small colored disc, the kind from the watercolor sets we had on our desks. She dropped one after the other: red, blue, brown, yellow, orange, purple, bringing her heel down, slowly pulverizing them into powder on the gray cement. When the doors finally opened, we filed in past the smeared rainbow on the ground. When I got to my desk, I checked for my own paints. I opened the thin metal case. They were gone. I didn't complain to the teacher. I wasn't angry or hurt. I knew that all those colors were so carefully and completely crushed because I was white.